And we continue at 2:05 in the afternoon on the John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wangs in Culver City.
John, it looks like Oaklanders have had enough as the owner of a cash for gold store in Oakland opened fire on attempted robbers, killing 2 of them.
It's wild, wild west out here.
Well, there are 2 fewer people to rob jewelry stores in Oakland.
It's a lot of crime now.
Well, there's a little bit less than what there was yesterday. 800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is the ABC News legal analyst and host of the Too Many Lawyers podcast, which you can download wherever you download your favorite podcast. Royal Oakes, welcome.
Hey, thank you, John.
Royal, let's start out with the tragic news involving Charlie Kirk, who was assassinated in cold blood while doing a Q&A with students at a university in Utah. It was a scene that played out not just in person in front of that large crowd, but the video, the graphic, horrific video of him taking a bullet to the neck was all over social media and all over a bunch of eyeballs, and people are still trying to process just exactly what happened over there. They are obviously looking for justice. This killer, they want to be brought on trial. They want to be tried and convicted. And in the state of Utah, Royal, the death penalty is still legal.
Exactly right. It's on the table not only as a state law matter, but, John, the federal government still has a death penalty as well. We don't know if federal charges will be brought, but if they are, it is possible he could find himself on a federal death row as well if convicted.
So can you explain just exactly who has jurisdiction here? Because typically when you deal with crimes like murder, unless it is a federal official, if it's a member of Congress or if it's the postmaster general or it happens on a military base, then it's a federal crime. But typically, if a crime takes place at a state university in a specific place, usually it's the state that is the one that leads the investigation. They conduct the prosecution. The trial happens in state court. But in this particular case, the FBI appears to be leading the investigation. Why is it that the feds are leading and not the locals?
Yeah, it's a great question. Of course, everybody's very familiar with it as armchair experts because we've all seen it hundreds of times on TV, the turf battles where the different levels of guys are growling at each other. So usually, as you suggest, murder is handled by state or local folks because that's principally where you'd get the prosecution. Sometimes, though, the FBI gets involved. For example, sometimes the local folks call the FBI in because they've got specialized resources for ballistics or DNA or whatever, so they just might invite them in. Another option is that both the feds and the state people think that federal laws may be implicated. For example, if there's a federal law saying you may not have a certain kind of rifle, some sort of assault weapon, if it's banned under federal law, that becomes a federal deal. If there's interstate activity, if the weapon was brought across state lines or people crossed state lines, or if it's considered domestic terrorism and political violence threatening civil rights, then the FBI has jurisdiction. So it's possible they don't really know exactly what's going on, and it seems like a real black box in terms of what happened. Sometimes you have joint investigations. So at this point, even the authorities may not know exactly which way the case is going to go, but on the chance that both jurisdictions will want their fingerprints on it, it looks like they're working together.
Could it be that they think that this might be part of some sort of larger plot or larger plan that might involve going across state lines? Because if this murder, if this assassination was something that was part of something bigger, something grander, they obviously are privy to more information than we are right now, so we don't know if that's true or not, then maybe that could be an angle that could get the feds involved.
Absolutely. I think that's very likely. I mean, and because we don't have all the facts, we can't reconstruct it completely, but we are seeing reports that this may have been a sniper-style shooting from a distance, maybe from a rooftop. And that suggests, tactical knowledge and skill and planning. Was it a professional shooter? What really does that mean? Were there any foreign actors involved? Because of the possibility of these things. That's another reason for the federal authorities to get involved. If it turns out there is no real evidence of that, then the feds will probably back off and defer to the local authorities.
I saw one college administrator, not in Utah, in a different state, say, well, see, this is exactly the reason why we shouldn't have conservative speakers on our campus, because violence comes along with it. So we shouldn't have any conservative speakers on our campus. I was just sitting here scratching my head as I was reading this, thinking, okay, after this tragedy, that's the lesson that you walk away with? We need less speech?
Yeah, but just truly amazing. It's just so sad that so many people are so focused on diversity, except diversity of thought. And the idea that regardless of the campus climate, whether it's Berkeley or Utah or whatever, the idea that people shouldn't be allowed to speak because we want to prevent violence, it's really shameful. But, unfortunately, it's just a symptom of our toxic partisanship that really seems to define our era.
I wonder if this will be the next excuse to prevent people like Charlie Kirk from speaking on college campuses, where they're going to say, look, here's the deal. We're going to make you pay for all of this extra security, and it's going to cost a fortune, and we're going to make you take out an insurance policy on this event, and that's going to cost a fortune. So if you could raise some ungodly amount of money, you can bring your speaker on campus. If you can't, no dice.
Yeah, it's just so sad that the powers that be within the academic world are willing to go that way. I mean, I remember Ann Coulter would be basically hustled off of campuses because there was a potential for violence, and it's just such a shame. I mean, basically you talk about one-party states. You basically have a one-party institution in terms of academics. I mean, look at the situation. It's different, of course, but look at after October 7, when there were anti-Israeli protests, pro-Palestinian protests at UCLA. Remember, they took over the quad there between Royce Hall and Powell Library, and they put up signs, "No Jews allowed." And the UCLA administration went along with it, with the analogous thought that you were expressing. Well, we don't want anybody to get hurt. We just want to protect health. No, you don't. If you see a racist sign like that, you go in and you take the sign down and you disperse the people who are saying this is a no Jewish student area. But that's not the instinct of academia. They just have their one, mono look at the world, and it doesn't involve free speech.
How do they get away with that? Because you look at these institutions, especially the public ones, all of our tax dollars go to pay for these institutions. Anyone of any religion should be able to walk on those campuses without the fear of being assaulted or shot or killed due to their religion, their political affiliation, their ideology, whatever the case may be. But it seems like they're perfectly accepting of the fact that these universities are just no-go zones unless you believe the way they believe.
I think it's just a function of the fact that it's just overwhelmingly left of center. You read statistics and you find that maybe 95% of professors are registered Democrats. There are virtually no Republicans. And it's not a new thing. I mean, the late, great William Buckley wrote a book that put him on the map called God and Man at Yale. He had just gone through his undergraduate time at Yale, and he wrote a book about how it was just totally liberal. There was absolutely no room for diversity of thought. And in a way, it's just gotten worse ever since the 50s.
We're speaking with Royal Oakes, ABC News legal analyst. Royal, let's talk about a different assassination. This was an attempted assassination, the second assassination attempt of President Donald Trump, where a man who is now being brought up on charges now says he wants to represent himself in court. You think the judge is going to let that happen?
Yeah, actually, the new news is, John, she's decided, yes, he may represent himself, and it's ridiculous. It's just a clown show. I mean, this is the guy, Ryan Ruth, who, he's not the one that shot and got Trump in the ear and killed somebody at that rally in Pennsylvania. This is the second one where he's lurking by the sixth fairway in the bushes, hoping to get Trump as he comes along 2 holes later. Trump was a couple of holes away. Instead, he fortunately, idiotically points his barrel of his rifle through the bushes. Secret Service guy shoots at him, misses him. The guy doesn't even get a shot. Races off, and because he left in such a hurry, they were able to notice him and follow him and catch him. But here's the weird deal. I mean, the guy's a nutcase. I mean, he's saying, I think we should settle this by a golf game. I'll play golf against Trump, and if I win, I become president. And if he wins, then he can execute me. By the way, I'd like access to a putting green to help get ready for this. Well, is he nuts or is he just joking? Then he's saying, I want strippers. I want all sorts of special privileges. He wants to ask the jury in the jury selection process, well, if you're driving along on the highway and you see a turtle, what would you do? So he's a very off-the-wall guy, and you may ask yourself, how did he get permission to represent himself? And the answer is the courts in America have made it very clear you do have a right to represent yourself, as stupid as that is, but the judge has to make sure that you're not a complete nutcase. Well, the judge has determined she thinks he's competent. But frankly, John, I think he'd be smarter if he brought the public defender in who's been advising him, and the guy would say, we're switching defenses. He's nuts, temporary insanity, because otherwise there's no way he's going to be able to escape life in prison.
What's the impression you get? Do you think he's legitimately that nuts, or do you think this is an act? And I say that because there's a famous case where there was a mobster who was being brought up on charges, La Cosa Nostra in New York City. And the guy realized that the only way that he wasn't going to the clink was if he convinced the judge and the jury that he was crazy. So he'd run around in his bathrobe, bark like a dog, act as crazy as he possibly could, and no one bought it, but he at least put it out there because he thought it was his best defense. Do you get the impression that this is an act, or do you think that this guy is this cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs?
Yeah, I think it involves the breakfast cereal. And the reason I say that is because, he's been acting crazy all along. Remember, he went over to Ukraine to act as a mercenary soldier on his own, uninvited. And then he comes up with this plan to kill Trump, and he writes a letter to a pal before it on the assumption that the attempt failed. And he writes in the letter, well, I failed. Now it's up to you. And I'm offering $150,000 to anybody who's willing to take Donald Trump out. And then he goes ahead and makes this attempt by the golf course. And since then, he's just been saying really basically semi-crazy stuff. The problem with letting him be his own lawyer is that then on appeal, some real lawyers will say, well, the judge made a mistake in allowing him to testify, to be his own lawyer. It was guaranteed that it would be a clown show and a big circus, and he really was not able to protect his rights. Yes, he has a constitutional right to be his own lawyer if he's not a nutcase, but it can really muddy the waters. So the problem is the judge is in trouble either way. If she says no, you're going to have to put up with a public defender. Some appellate courts say, you deprived him of a constitutional right to represent himself, and we don't think the evidence of his nuttiness was all that serious.
How do juries typically respond to defendants who represent themselves, especially in this condition with these tactics? Because I could see it going either way. I could see them saying, this guy's an idiot and he's wasting our time and I want to fry him. And I could also see them saying to themselves, this guy is seriously sick in the head, and I now have sympathy for him.
Yeah, I think the latter is a real possibility. It could work out for him, because if you don't represent yourself, and you probably won't testify, because usually people don't, then you're sitting there all weird and sullen the whole time. The jury's glancing over at the guy, and then they vote to convict him because the evidence against him is overwhelming. So now instead, imagine this scenario that's happening. He's the guy that stands up and looks at the jury in the eye and smiles at him and says, morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're here to select the jury today. I'm going to be asking some questions. I hope I don't interfere with your privacy, but, it's important because, my life's on the line. So let's talk about this case. How much have you heard about the attempted shooting, et cetera? That kind of thing can, sort of humanize him. And then throughout the rest of the trial, he's the one asking questions, cross-examining, direct. Now, he's going to do a horrible job because he doesn't have any training, and there's nothing based on what we've seen from him to suggest that, he's some sort of a secret F. Lee Bailey. But, yeah, I think the short answer is he's probably better off trying to bond with the jury, and they might end up saying, well, he didn't actually get a shot off. I'm not 100% sure he really intended to go through with it. He pointed his gun, then he got scared and ran away. So, yeah, he's probably smarter by going this route.
We're speaking with Royal Oakes, host of the Too Many Lawyers podcast, which you can download wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Royal, in the state of North Carolina, there was a beautiful girl, a Ukrainian refugee, who was stabbed to death by a nut who had a rap sheet longer than a CVS receipt. This guy went before a judge not long before he ended up stabbing this woman to death. And the judge, instead of putting this guy in jail, allowed him to roam free among us. After looking at the credentials of this judge, it's now clear that this judge never passed the bar. She is not legally allowed to practice law in the state of North Carolina, but was to a judge and allowed to set this guy free. How in the world does that happen?
Different states have different rules about what you need to have on your record in order to be a judge and also a magistrate judge. A magistrate judge is a special category of judgeships where they are not the regular judges appointed by the governor or the president. Instead, they're chosen by the other the real judges in the court. And I say real judges. The magistrate judges are real judges, but they handle matters generally, unless both sides stipulate it, we'll have the whole trial handled by a magistrate. They handle matters that are a little more ministerial and don't require quite as much experience or expertise as you would get from the other judges. So that's why they do it. And, it seems like a bad idea, but maybe there's a shortage of people to do magistrate judge work. Maybe they're trying to save money in North Carolina. And, if they have a bad track record, this is going to give it a bad name, and maybe they'll change the law and insist that somebody be an actual lawyer.
And I would imagine that there are plenty of lawyers who went to top-notch law schools, who passed the bar, whose ideology would lead them to the same decision as this woman.
Very, very possible, yeah. But it is kind of frustrating because, when you see judges letting people out after, multiple convictions, 14 times here. And, of course, it brings you back to the old story from the 80s when Michael Dukakis was running for president against George Bush, the dad, and Dukakis lost for various reasons, one of which was he supported a weekend furlough program in Massachusetts for people who were there in prison life without the possibility of parole. But we trust you, so go home and have a ball, with the family on the weekend. Be sure you come back. And Willie Horton, of course, left for the weekend, raped a woman, assaulted a man, and Michael Dukakis lost the election.
Royal Oakes, host of the Too Many Lawyers podcast, which you can download wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Royal, thanks so much for stopping by.
You bet. Thanks.
800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is the author of the book, Liberal Misery, available online at Amazon.com. You can also read him in the pages of The Federalist and the New York Post. Eddie Scarry, welcome.
Hey, John. Happy to be with you.
Well, thanks so much for stopping by, because I've got to tell you, ever since the news broke about Charlie Kirk being shot yesterday afternoon, I've just been sick to my stomach. And last night I went for a run and tried to clear my head and tried to get all of that out of my mind. And then I finished with the run and I came back and I opened up my social media, and oh boy, was that a mistake. Because during the day, I was looking at the reaction among Democratic politicians. And for the most part, they reacted okay. There were a couple of exceptions. J.D. Pritzker is a complete disgrace over in the state of Illinois. There was a congressman from Massachusetts who also had a really boneheaded response. And then, of course, you had Matthew Dowd, who's more of a talking head than a politician, but He did run for office in Texas, so I guess we could lump him in. He got fired over at MSNBC for his remarks about Charlie Kirk after Charlie Kirk was shot and killed. But I have to say that there was a massive fissure, for me at least, between how the politicians were reacting and how people on the left in my own personal social network were reacting on social media. And I know people are going to say, well, there are bots out there that are meant to inflame you one way or the other. I'm talking exclusively about people I know from my own personal life, people I went to school with, people I worked with, people I live next to, those types of people. And they were the ones who were openly celebrating. And they were the ones who were taking great delight in what happened. And some of them didn't go quite that far, but they were making it known that they thought he got what he deserved in some capacity or another. And I thought to myself, there is a huge break right now between where these politicians are, and I guess you could understand that. A, they're professionals, so they know it's a bad look to the public at large, so they know even if they think that way, you're not supposed to say it. But it's also an occupational hazard for them, because if you go out and say, yeah, it's open season on political figures, well, guess what? That includes you. So you'd be real dumb to go out and say something like that. But their troops are not where their electeds are. Their troops are in a real dark place right now, at least on my feed. Are you experiencing the same thing?
Yeah, well, first I just want to say my heart really breaks for Charlie Kirk's wife, who is now a widow, his children who now do not have a father. Incredibly heartbreaking. And he is someone that I was only loosely in touch with. I was on his show the last time back in 2022. Great interview we did. And just also someone who, in a weird way, not in any way indicating we were childhood friends or anything like that, but our careers kind of started at the same time. So it feels like growing up with somebody. Like, that's really how it felt. And so this tragedy really has affected me in ways that I think that any other similar one has not. So it's been a really unique situation in that regard. But to your point about the difference between the base of the anti-American Democrat Party and the Democrat leaders, this is kind of how the party operates. And this has been the case for a very long time, but I think that it's still not something that's widely acknowledged as you are right now on your show, which is very important that you do acknowledge it. The whole party kind of operates in this weird mafia style, almost like a money laundering, like a laundering operation kind of thing, where like you don't actually have to say anything and things get mixed in and you will get cover. You will get cover largely from the news media. So for example, the news media can find any random person, and one that comes to mind was, if you remember, I can't remember his name, but he was the Catholic Covington Catholic school kid who was seen on a little video where it looked like he was in some way provoking a Indian American, an elderly Indian American in Washington, D.C., and he's wearing a MAGA hat. And CNN was sued for a lot of money. They settled for a lot of money ultimately for defamation of this young man. But CNN and others, many others, turn on them and make that a person who represents the entire Republican Party, right? That's supposed to be reflective of the core and attitude and motivations of the Republican Party. Never mind the fact that they were completely wrong in the way they were trying to portray the incident, again, as reflecting the fact they had to settle a defamation suit for some I think it was like tens of millions of dollars. But they do not do that with the Democrat Party. They do not. They instead, what the media will do is look at what Nancy Pelosi says, Chuck Schumer has said, what various governors like Gavin Newsom in your state, wannabe presidential hopefuls like Pritzker in Illinois. They'll look at them and look at their statements and go, okay, so the Democrat Party, they're disavowing this. They're also equally outraged by the violence. They are disavowing the violence. and yet they won't do what they did like to the Covington Catholic kid, which is say, look at this, look at what their base is saying, look at the absolutely disgusting things that are going on online on social media, and that's also, by the way, not when they aren't saying it themselves. They're not when the media themselves, like Dowd from in Texas, the guy in Texas who's just an absolute wacko. He goes on MSNBC, and I know he was fired, but that's like, that's small potatoes. Their anchor, Katie Tour, was saying very, very similar things, like, almost like in a way kind of like excusing what happened, or in like a weird way passively justifying it. The way that the media covers, I think that the media is a lot of the problem with the Democrat Party, and is a lot of deserves a lot of the blame for the exact thing that you're talking about right now, where the base of the anti-American Democrat Party, they can get away with saying the most disgusting, vile things in a situation like this and on any given day, but because their leaders say the right thing with the right tone, and they read from the script about we disavow the violence, that's supposed to be okay. Well, we wipe our hands of that and everything's fine.
I've got to say, as I was scrolling through it last night, I noticed a pattern as to who were the bad actors, who were the ones that were out there that were really spiking the football, who were the ones who were gloating. And I did pick up a pattern. They seem to be teachers, they seem to be in public health, or they seem to work for the government. And then I thought to myself, it's the same groups of people who wrecked the world during COVID. They're now the ones who are out there dancing in the end zone.
And a lot of boomers. Do you notice that too?
Yeah, a lot of them.
It's a lot of boomers. If he's listening right now, it's a guy who I otherwise mostly enjoy. He's a boomer, and I have nothing collectively against boomers. I think they get a lot of hate. But something I have seen in recent days, and I think a lot of people have kind of come to notice it, is that has become the angriest, most outspoken, active, aggressive faction of the anti-American Democrat Party is these liberal white boomers. I say whites purely just to identify them. Nothing to do with making it about race. They just happen to be white. And they are just, again, the angriest, most aggressive, outspoken, active element of this party. And they are the ones who, I guess because they're so, I don't know if they don't quite understand that everyone can see what they're doing on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, but they take license with that to say some really, truly disgusting things. And again, it's something that really needs to be studied sociologically. But no, as you were saying, I do think that there's otherwise this large swath of these teachers, and that speaks to another. I think you can even envision the exact type of person we're both referring to. So something's going on there. It's very strange, and to me, it's something novel. It's something that we hadn't really seen up until, I would say, probably starting around the start of the Biden presidency, or maybe even going back to the start of the Trump term one.
I'll tell you, I know there are groups out there that spend a lot of time researching and writing about how to fix the K through 12 system and how to take the political bias and the nastiness out of it. I don't think it's possible. I really don't. I think that the ideology is just baked into the cake for these people. If you have it in you to grave dance over the assassination of someone you disagree with, I don't think there's any expectation at all that you can play it straight when you're teaching a history lesson or an English lesson or PE even, whatever. I don't think we can do anything with that person. And I think that within the structure of public education, the most powerful group are the unions, and the unions call the shots, and they're not going to want to change. So I don't see that happening anytime soon. But I will say this, with AI looming and with the world about to change in fundamental ways, if everything I understand about AI is true, the jobs that AI is going to replace are jobs that involve any kind of repetition. If you do something repetitively, you're probably at risk of losing your job. Well, if you give the same history lecture 5 times a day and you grade the same papers 5 times a day, That's a repetitive job. Public education is going to be completely remade with AI. And I almost think it's more important, as opposed to trying to fix public education as it stands now, to make sure that when it's remade with AI, that we do so in a way that's fact-based, that is not based primarily on equity politics, DEI politics, everything that these groups of people believe in, and it's strictly the basics of reading, writing, math, those sorts of things. And with AI, we may have a greater ability to impose those values than we did with the teachers.
Yeah, I think you're way ahead of me on this one. But I think this speaks to your point that the right and the center of this country has got to be a lot more proactive and involved in these institutions, these cultural hubs that shape everything, that shape our future, which of course is the children. And as you were saying, is there anything to do about? You were saying that there's nothing we can do about some of these people, because it's true that it is, and this is very well covered in my book, Liberal Misery. The politics and the approach to politics on the left, on the anti-American Democrat Party, is so all-consuming in these people's lives. It's the first thing they think about when they wake up. When they meet a new person, it's one of the first things they're curious about, and they will out and out ask you about how you voted and about your views on things like abortion. They will straight up just ask you and one of those things. And by the way, if it's not the right answer, if it's not the answer they want to hear, you are done. The relationship is over. And to the extent that there's anything to be done about it, again, I think it is being more proactive, being involved in these areas that maybe it's very easy to say, well, that doesn't interest me. I like having a normal life. I like to have a not contentious life. I don't want to fight with anybody. It's easy to say that, but when one side in this country is eager for the fight and says, I've got no problem popping off on you in front of people at a social gathering, in any other polite setting, mixed company, anything, it doesn't work. That side's always going to win. So you have to be willing to engage, be ready to say, I will meet you on that battlefield. I will talk about it. And not only will I talk about it, I'll talk about it before you even bring it up. It sounds like a contentious way to live, but to the extent that there's anything to be done about the side who is perfectly fine with that, it's sending the signal, sending the message over and over again that I am not afraid of you, and I will confront you on these issues. And it can be uncomfortable, but the right has to get more comfortable with discomfort, is what I would say.
Charlie Kirk's audience was young men, and Charlie Kirk spent a lot of his time talking to young men, either on his podcast or at universities and colleges, and he was highly successful. Gen Z men shifted 44 points in the Republicans' direction over the last 2 years. In the demographic group, men 18 to 29, in 2023, they went Democrat by 26 points. In 2025, they're Republican by 18 points. How do you think they're reacting to this assassination?
I can only imagine that they're shocked. I mean, who saw this happening? And again, me and Charlie Kirk, not close friends by any means, had very limited interaction, and yet I still feel like I grew up with this person. We were very close in age. As he advanced in his career and he succeeded and he matured, so I was doing the same thing. I knew, it was like I was following along with this person. So in that regard, you know him, and I think a lot of these young people, especially the ones who got engaged in American civics and the political discourse, that he was their gateway to that. And to see the person who brought you there and who you enjoyed, and I was not like an avid listener to his podcast, or I'd never been to a Turning Points USA rally or anything like that. But he's always struck me as a genuine. I'd heard him when he would be guests on certain different podcasts and shows and things like that. Struck me as a genuinely nice person who cared, who was interested in engaging in people. The kind of person, if politics is not something you're talking about, you're going to have no matter what, you're going to have a good time with him. You're going to find him to be perfectly pleasant. So I think his core audience, the people who really enjoyed him, which, by the way, yes, I hear you on saying it was men, but I was just looking at a photograph where at this event where this tragic incident occurred, there were two young women. One was a child. One looked like a woman who was probably in her college age years, maybe high school, and they're fleeing in terror because of the gunshot. And I'm just looking at that thinking, these are people who they're doing the right thing. They're engaging in American civics, the political discourse, and now they're terrified because someone chose violence instead of freedom. And his audience, I think that they're shocked, but I think as the shock wears, and even maybe simultaneously, they're very, very angry. I think there's a lot of anger out there about what happened. I can definitely tell you I am, because a lot of us are saying, violence doesn't justify more violence, but we're thinking, what do we do? What do we do to put an end to that and to get people to understand where we are, to get the political opposition to understand that this is not going to be tolerated anymore. It can't be. We've seen too much in just a year's time. In 1 year's time, we've seen who our current president is, almost assassinated twice, shot for sure, and now we're seeing Charlie Kirk dead. We just saw those kids who were praying at the school shot dead. I mean, the message needs to get across that this can't be tolerated anymore.
Eddie Scarry, author of the book Liberal Misery, available online at Amazon.com. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks, John.
It's the John Phillips Show.